Captain Greg Thorne didn't ask. He didn't explain. He simply planted himself in the aisle, crossed his arms over his chest, and said loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear, "You move now!" His finger was pointed directly at the woman seated in the master suite cabin, a calm, slender black woman in a beige coat who hadn't said a single word to provoke him. She looked up at him, unhurried, unbothered, and that stillness seemed to infuriate him more than anything else could have. "I said move." He repeated his voice, dropping into something uglier, something that had nothing to do with aviation protocol, and everything to do with who he believed she was, and who he was absolutely certain she was not. If you are new here, welcome. Subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and follow this story all the way to the end because I promise you what happens next will leave you speechless. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. Her name was Nia Sterling, and she had not slept in 31 hours. She had been on back-to-back calls since Tuesday restructuring meetings, acquisition briefings, legal reviews that stretched past midnight, and all she had wanted for the first time in what felt like months was 4 uninterrupted hours in the air, to think, to breathe, and maybe if she was lucky to close her eyes. She had not worn her usual fitted blazer, or the silk blouse her assistant always laid out before high-profile appearances. She had pulled on a beige wool coat she'd had since graduate school, grabbed the worn leather tote she refused to replace, despite what her publicist said about image, and she had walked into the private terminal at Teterboro Airport, alone, without security, without an entourage, without any of the visible armor that told the world exactly who Nia Sterling was. That was, she would later reflect, the decision that started everything. The Global 7500 was hers. She had finalized the acquisition of Velocity Private Aviation 11 days ago, a company that operated a fleet of ultra-long-range business jets for high-net-worth clients and corporations. Velocity had been bleeding money under its previous ownership, riddled with management problems and a culture of unchecked internal authority that made Nia's acquisition team wince when they reviewed the internal audits. She had bought it anyway because she saw what it could become under the right leadership, and because she had a talent some called it reckless, she called it vision for walking into broken things and rebuilding them into something no one had imagined possible. She was 32 years old. She had built her first company in a studio apartment with 2 laptops and a whiteboard. She had been told no so many times and by so many people that the word had lost its shape in her mind. It was just noise now. Background static. She stepped onto the aircraft and immediately felt the energy of the cabin tighten. The lead flight attendant, a woman named Candace with close-cropped auburn hair and an expression that hovered somewhere between professional and contemptuous, looked at Nia the way people look at a package delivered to the wrong address. She didn't reach for Nia's tote. She didn't smile. She simply stepped back half a pace and said, "You're the charter passenger." "I'm on the manifest," Nia said. "Yeah, right." Candace glanced down at the tablet in her hand, then back up at Nia, then at the coat at the bag, at the absence of a stylist or a personal assistant trailing behind her. "The captain will be out shortly. You can wait in the forward cabin." "I'll wait in the suite," Nia said. There was a pause, a small, deliberate pause that communicated volumes. "The suite is prepared for a priority guest," Candace said. "I am the priority guest," Nia replied, and she said it without heat, without apology, moving past Candace toward the master's suite at the rear of the aircraft the way she moved through most obstacles, with quiet, absolute certainty. She settled in. She placed her tote on the seat beside her. She took out her phone and pulled up the briefing documents her team had sent, a 30-page dossier on Velocity's executive staff fleet management records, and a flagged section her chief legal officer had marked urgent that she hadn't had time to read yet. She would read it now. She had 45 minutes before wheels up. She didn't get 45 minutes, she got 6. Captain Greg Thorne came through the forward door with the swagger of a man who had never once considered that the room might not belong to him. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with silver at his temples, and the kind of bearing that came from decades of being deferred to. He had been flying private for 19 years. He had captained routes for heads of state, tech billionaires, professional athletes, 2 foreign prime ministers, and the kind of old American money that didn't need to announce itself because every surface it touched already knew. He was by every measure he used to evaluate the world important. He stepped into the master suite and looked at Nia the way you look at something that doesn't belong where you found it. "You need to move," he said. Nia looked up from her phone. "Excuse me. This cabin is reserved." He didn't offer more than that. He stood in the doorway with his arms crossed and waited for her to gather her things. "Reserved for whom?" Nia asked. "A VIP. I am the listed passenger on this flight," Nia said. She held his gaze without flinching. "My name is Nia Sterling. I'm on the manifest." Thorne's expression didn't change, not even slightly. "I've been made aware that there's a change to the passenger list. You'll be more comfortable in the forward cabin. We have a very nice jump seat." "A jump seat." Nia repeated it slowly, the way you repeat something back to make sure you heard it correctly, and also to make absolutely sure the other person understands what they have just said. "It's perfectly comfortable. Captain?" Her voice was still level, still even. But something in it shifted just slightly, the way pressure shifts in a room when a window closes. "I purchased this flight. I am the only listed passenger, and you are asking me to vacate the master suite of an aircraft that belongs to me to sit in a jump seat." Thorne took one step into the cabin. "Ma'am, I don't know what you were told when you booked, but I run this aircraft, and I make decisions about cabin assignments based on operational needs. Now I'm going to ask you one more time. And I'm going to answer you one more time," Nia said, and she set her phone down on the armrest and looked at him the way she looked at quarterly reports that didn't add up. Calm, precise, utterly unbothered. "No." The silence that followed was the kind that has temperature. It was cold. Thorne's jaw tightened. She could see at the small, muscular flex at the corner of his mouth the way his weight shifted forward onto the balls of his feet. He was not a man who was told no. Not in this cabin. Not by a woman in a beige coat with a beat-up tote bag who had no business being where she was sitting. "Candace," he called without breaking eye contact with Nia. Candace appeared in the doorway within 3 seconds, which told Nia she had been standing close enough to hear everything. "Help our passenger relocate to the forward cabin," Thorne said. Candace stepped forward. "Ma'am, if you'll just—" "I won't," Nia said. And then she picked up her phone again and began scrolling through her contacts. "Ma'am, you can both stand there if you'd like," Nia said, finding the number she was looking for. "But I'm not moving, and this plane isn't taking off until I've made a phone call." Thorne laughed. It was a short, dismissive sound, the kind of laugh designed to make the person who prompted it feel small. "You're going to make a phone call." "I am," Nia said. "And who exactly are you calling?" She pressed dial and put the phone to her ear. "My legal team." Thorne laughed again, this time with Candace, and there was something in the way they looked at each other. A shared language. A private understanding that told Nia this was not the first time they had done this. This was not improvised contempt. This was practiced. The line picked up on the second ring. "Marcus," Nia said, "I need you to pull up the ownership documentation for the Global 7500 registered to Velocity Private Aviation. Tail number November Victor 77 Lima. Yes, I need it sent to the operational email on record for the aircraft, and I need it done in the next 3 minutes." She paused, listening. "No, everything's fine. We just have a small disagreement about seating arrangements." She said the last 2 words with a tone so dry it could have started a fire. She ended the call and set the phone back on the armrest. Thorne was still standing in the doorway. But something had moved in his expression, a tiny fracture like a hairline crack in plaster. It was small and he covered it quickly, but Nia saw it. "That won't change anything," he said. "Give it 3 minutes," Nia replied. It took 2. Candace's tablet chimed first. She glanced at it out of habit and went very still. The color shifted in her face in the specific way it shifts when you read something you were not expecting and cannot immediately process. She looked at the screen again, then at Nia, then at Thorne. "Greg," she said. Just his name. But the way she said it carried the full weight of what she had just read. Thorne didn't look at the tablet. He kept his eyes on Nia. "Whatever it says she owns the plane," Candace said quietly. The cabin went so quiet, Nia could hear the ventilation system cycling. She owns the company, Candace continued, and her voice had taken on a careful, thinned-out quality, like someone walking on ice they've just been told is thin. Velocity Private Aviation. The acquisition closed 11 days ago. Candace paused, looked at her screen once more, as if the words might have rearranged themselves. She's the CEO. Thorne's arms unfolded slowly. His chin came up, and then, because he was the kind of man he was, he said, "That doesn't change my authority on this aircraft." Nia looked at him for a long moment. She was 32 years old. She had sat across tables from men 3 times her age who had used that exact same voice, that immovable, self-certain voice that was less about logic and more about refusing to believe that the geography of power had shifted beneath their feet. She knew this voice. She had been hearing it since she was 19 years old and walked into her first investor meeting in a borrowed blazer. It had never stopped her once. "You're right," she said, and watched confusion flicker through his eyes before she continued. "You have operational authority over this aircraft while it's in the air, but this aircraft is not in the air, and before it goes anywhere, I think we should talk." She stood up. She was not particularly tall, but she had a way of standing that made the room feel like it oriented toward her. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit down, Captain." He didn't sit. "I don't take orders from passengers. You take them from owners," Nia said. "And as of 11 days ago, that's what I am." She looked at Candace. "Close the forward door, please." Candace looked at Thorne. Thorne's jaw flexed again. Candace closed the door. The 3 of them were alone. Nia reached into her tote and pulled out a manila folder that her chief legal officer had prepared and placed in her bag 2 nights ago because Marcus Webb, who had been Nia's legal chief for 6 years, never let her walk into a contested situation without paper she could put on a table. She opened the folder and laid 3 documents flat on the surface of the suite's console: the certificate of ownership, transfer the executive authority clause from the acquisition agreement, and a 3rd document she placed slightly apart from the others. "Those first 2 you've seen," she said, pointing to the ownership transfer and executive clause. "You can look at them again if you need to." Thorne didn't look at them. "This one," Nia said, tapping the 3rd document, "is what I want to talk about." Candace's eyes went to it. Thorne's didn't, but his stillness changed. It was a different kind of stillness now, the stillness of a man who has just heard a sound in a direction he didn't expect. 6 months ago, Nia said, a Velocity Global 7500. This aircraft tail number, November Victor 77 Lima, was logged as operational on a date when it had no chartered passengers and no scheduled maintenance. It flew a round trip between Teterboro and a private airstrip outside Nassau. The fuel was billed to a corporate operational account. The crew manifest listed 2 names. Yours. She looked at Thorne. And yours. She looked at Candace. Neither of them said anything. "My acquisition team found 4 more instances over the past 18 months, Nia continued. Different destinations, same pattern, company fuel, company crew, no revenue passenger, no charter contract, no authorized purpose. She paused, and the pause had the specific weight of someone who has laid every card on the table and is now simply waiting for the other person to understand the hand they're holding. "That's not a scheduling anomaly, Captain. That's fraud." Thorne moved. He took a step toward the console, and for a moment, the geometry of the cabin shifted in a way that should have been threatening. He was bigger than her. He had been in charge of things in enclosed spaces for 19 years. His entire professional identity was built on the fact that once that cockpit door closed, his word was the only word that mattered. But Nia didn't step back. She didn't even shift her weight. "I'd think carefully," she said, "about what you do next." Thorne stopped. Something behind his eyes, not remorse but calculation, moved. "I don't know what documents your team put together," he said, and his voice had changed, lost some of its authority, taken on the careful quality of a man choosing words instead of wielding them. "But I've been flying for Velocity for 11 years. My record—" "Your record includes a complaint filed by a junior crew member 2 years ago that was buried by the previous operations director," Nia said. "That director no longer works for Velocity as of last Wednesday." She closed the folder. "I've been thorough, Captain. That's sort of my thing." Candace made a sound. It wasn't quite a word, just a sound, the kind of involuntary vocalization that escapes when your body processes something before your mind catches up. Thorne looked at Candace, and that look, the look he gave her, told Nia something she hadn't been entirely certain of until that moment. It told her that Candace was not simply an accomplice who happened to be on those flights. Candace knew exactly what the folder contained. Candace had probably known since the moment Nia walked onto this aircraft that today was a day something was going to happen. What Candace had not known, what neither of them had known, was which direction the something was going to come from. "I want to make something clear," Nia said, and she sat back down with the unhurried ease of someone who has been exactly where she intended to be this entire time. "I didn't come on this plane today to do this. I came because I have a meeting in London and I needed a flight. But you made a choice when I walked through that door. You looked at me and you made a decision about who I was and what I deserved, and that decision is going to cost you. Not because I'm angry, I'm genuinely not, but because the decision you made is the same decision that has been made in this company for years, and it has cost a lot of people who didn't have what I have, who didn't have a folder full of documentation and a legal team on speed dial who just had to sit in the jump seat and take it." The quiet in the cabin was absolute. Thorne's mouth opened, closed, opened again. He was not a man who had many words available to him in moments like this, because moments like this were not supposed to happen to men like him. "You can sit down," Nia said again, and this time after a long moment that contained everything: his pride, his 19 years, his certainty, his contempt. He sat. Candace remained standing near the door. Her tablet hung at her side, and her face had taken on the expression of someone doing extensive internal calculations with no idea what the answer was going to be. "Here's what happens now," Nia said. "You don't fly this route today. I'll have a relief crew here within the hour. You and your crew will be met at the terminal by our head of operations and by representatives from my legal team who will walk you through the next steps in the formal review process." She looked at Thorne steadily. "That review is going to be thorough. It's going to be fair. But based on what my team has already documented, I think you both know what the findings are likely to be." Thorne's eyes had gone somewhere else, not to her, not to the documents, but to some middle distance that was probably his career, his pilot's license, his 19 years, everything he had built, standing on the assumption that the cockpit was inviolable and his authority was absolute. "This is," he started. "Captain," Nia said, and her voice held no cruelty, no triumph, just the clear, clean edge of someone who means what they say and says what they mean. "Don't." He didn't. Outside through the aircraft's oval windows, the Teterboro tarmac stretched flat and gray under an overcast November sky. Ground crew moved equipment around other aircraft parked in the distance. Everything out there was ordinary and unhurried, the routine life of an airport going about its business, completely unaware that inside this particular Global 7500 something had just fundamentally shifted. Nia picked up her phone and began composing a message to Marcus. "Relief crew needed Teterboro," she typed. "Also get HR and legal on standby. We're going to need a formal process open on 2 employees by end of day. I'll brief you in full once I'm airborne." She paused before she sent it, then added one line. "Also remind me to review the jump seat configuration on this aircraft. We may need to remove it entirely." She sent the message, set the phone face down on the armrest, and looked out the window. There was still a meeting to get to. There was still London, and the briefing documents open on her phone, and a room full of Velocity executives who were expecting to meet their new CEO for the first time, and who were, she suspected, also carrying certain assumptions about what they were going to find when she walked through the door. Those assumptions, like Captain Thorne's, were about to be corrected. She had not built a billion-dollar company by letting people define the room for her. She had built it by walking in, sitting exactly where she chose to sit, and staying there calm, certain, and absolutely unmovable until the room understood. She had been doing it since she was 19 years old. She was not tired of it yet. Nia knew the exact number because she had been watching the clock on her phone with the particular attention of someone managing 3 things simultaneously. The ongoing message thread with Marcus, a separate call with her head of HR that she took standing in the narrow galley corridor because she preferred to pace when she thought, and the quiet, unignorable awareness of Captain Greg Thorne sitting 12 feet away in the forward cabin, doing the thing that prideful men do when they've been cornered and haven't yet accepted it. He was performing patience. Arms crossed, jaw-set eyes on the middle distance, the posture of a man who believed against mounting evidence that this situation was still recoverable. Candace had not sat down at all. She stood near the forward galley with her arms folded tight across her chest, and every 30 seconds or so, her eyes moved to Nia with the careful measuring quality of someone trying to calculate the temperature of a room by looking at a single candle. She had not spoken since Nia laid the documents on the console. Her silence was the loud kind, the kind that's working very hard. When the sound of footsteps on the air stairs broke the tension, Thorne's head came up like a man who'd been waiting for backup to arrive. What arrived was not backup. Derek Osei came through the aircraft door first. Velocity's head of operations, a compact, serious man in his mid-40s who had been with the company for 8 years and who Nia's acquisition team had noted was one of the few members of senior staff with an absolutely clean record. Behind him came 2 members of Nia's legal team, a woman named Priya Anand, who Nia trusted with the kind of information that could end careers, and a younger associate carrying a hard-sided case that contained, among other things, a forensic copy of Velocity's flight records going back 30 months. Derek stepped into the forward cabin, took in the scene. Thorne in the seat, Candace at the galley, Nia standing in the doorway between the 2 cabins, and his expression did the thing that competent people's expressions do when they absorb a situation quickly and accurately. It tightened, focused. He looked at Thorne the way you look at a colleague you once respected and are now deeply personally disappointed in. "Captain Thorne," Derek said. "Derek!" Thorne's voice had gone careful. "Glad you're here. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding." "There hasn't," Derek said. He was not rude about it. He was simply factual in the way that people who have seen the documentation tend to be factual. He turned to Nia. "Miss Sterling, I apologize for not being here when you boarded." "You didn't know I was coming," Nia said. "That was intentional." Derek nodded once. He understood immediately she had wanted to see the company as it operated without a performance in her honor, and what she had seen was this. His jaw tightened, and he looked at the floor for a single moment, and in that moment, Nia understood that Derek Osei was not just professionally embarrassed. He was personally ashamed. This was his operation. These were his people. And what his people had done within the first 6 minutes of her boarding was treat the new owner of the company like she had wandered in off the street. "Captain Thorne," Derek said, turning back to face him, "I'm going to need your credentials." Thorne stood up. He uncrossed his arms and stood up slowly with great deliberateness, as if the speed of the movement itself was a form of protest. "You don't have the authority to—" "I do," Derek said. "As of the restructuring that took effect with the acquisition close, I report directly to the CEO, and I have operational authority over all crew personnel in non-flight situations. This aircraft is on the ground. You are on the ground." He extended his hand, palm up. "Credentials, Captain." The cabin held its breath. Thorne looked at Derek's outstretched hand for a long time. He looked at Priya, who had moved to stand slightly to Nia's left, and was watching the exchange with the serene, patient attention of someone who has read more legal precedents than most people have read novels. He looked at Candace, who looked away. That Candace looking away was the thing that finally moved him. Because Candace had been his for 11 years. She had been the person who knew who covered who stood at his door and said the right things to the right people. And she had just looked away. He reached into his breast pocket, removed his Velocity pilot credentials, and placed them in Derek's hand, not gently. "This is not over," Thorne said. "No," Nia said from the doorway, and her voice was so quiet it almost wasn't there. "It's not. There's a formal review process, and it will be thorough, and you will have every opportunity to respond to the findings." She paused. "But you will not be flying this aircraft today." Thorne picked up his jacket from the seat back, pulled it on with the precision of a man who needed something physical to do with his anger, and walked toward the door. He stopped when he was level with Nia, close enough that it was another kind of statement, the kind made with proximity, and looked down at her. "You have no idea." he said low for her ears only, "What you've just walked into." Naya held his gaze without adjusting any part of her face. "Tell me." He didn't. He walked off the aircraft. Candace followed without being asked, which told Nia that whatever arrangements had been made between them went deeper than a shared work history. Priya followed them out the associate with the hard case at her side, and the aircraft suddenly felt like a place that had exhaled. Derek stood in the forward cabin and looked at Naya. He had the expression of a man composing an apology that he knew was going to be inadequate. "Don't," Nia said before he could start. "Not yet. Tell me what you know about those flights." Derek's expression shifted. "Which flights?" "Nassau, Teterboro. Round trips logged as operational with no revenue passengers. 6 confirmed, possibly more." She watched something move through Derek's face. Not surprised, not quite. Closer to the look of a man who had suspected something for a long time and has just been handed the proof he didn't go looking for because part of him didn't want to find it. "I had questions," he said carefully, "about some of the fuel billing patterns last year. I flagged them internally." "To whom?" "Raymond Holt. He was the COO." "Raymond Holt no longer works for Velocity," Nia said. "I'm aware." Derek said it with the flat precision of someone who had learned about Raymond Holt's departure from the company in the same restructuring document that had reorganized his entire reporting structure. "When I flagged it, he told me the flights were authorized client development runs, prospective customer previews." He paused. "I had no documentation to refute that at the time." "Did you ask for documentation?" "A beat." "Yes." "And it never arrived." He said it simply without trying to dress it up. "I followed up twice. After the second time, Holt told me to focus on my operational remit and leave the finance questions to people who were paid to handle them." He looked at the floor. "I should have pushed harder." "Yes," Nia said. "You should have." She said it without cruelty, without softening it, because she didn't believe in softening accurate statements. "But you also flagged it, and you didn't cover it, and that matters." She looked at him steadily. "I need people who flag things. I need you to be that person going forward. Can you be that person?" Derek met her eyes. "Yes." "Good." She moved back into the master suite and picked up her tote. "The relief crew, who are they?" "Captain Diane Mercer and First Officer James Kwan, both on our approved roster, both clean record. Diane's been with us 4 years. I want to meet her before we're airborne." "Of course." Derek pulled out his phone and typed something quickly. "And I want the personnel files for every crew member who appeared on those 6 flight manifests pulled and flagged for review before I land in London. That includes ground crew who signed off on the fuel logs." "Understood." "And Derek." She stopped at the door to the suite and looked back at him. "I want to know if Thorne's words to me just now are anything I should take seriously." Derek looked up from his phone. "What did he say?" "That I have no idea what I've just walked into." Derek's expression did something complicated. The professional mask held, but underneath it something shifted a fraction of something she couldn't fully name. It might have been concern. It might have been the look of a man calculating how much of what he knew was his to share and how much of it was going to change everything once it was said out loud. "I'll pull some additional records," he said finally. "I think there may be things in the Holt files that my team flagged that you should see before you meet with the London team." It was the careful way he said it, the way the words were placed just far enough apart from each other, that made Nia set her tote down again. "Tell me now," she said. "It might be better." "Derek." He closed his eyes for exactly 1 second. When he opened them, he looked like a man who had just decided to jump and was airborne. "Raymond Holt wasn't just the COO," he said. Before Velocity was acquired by the previous ownership group, Holt was a principal investor. He had equity. When the company sold, that equity was converted, and he retained a financial interest in certain operational contracts, specifically the charters for 3 corporate clients that account for roughly 40% of Velocity's annual revenue. Nia waited. "When I flagged the fuel billing anomalies," Derek continued, "I didn't know that at the time. I found out 8 months later when one of our finance analysts, a woman named Tessa Brown, came to me with a discrepancy she'd found in the contract billing structure for one of those 3 clients." He paused. "Tessa filed an internal report. 48 hours later, she was reassigned to a role in our ground ops division in Dallas. I was told it was a promotion." Nia felt something cold move through her chest. Not fear, something more precise than fear. The particular sensation of understanding all at once that what you have walked into is substantially larger than what you were shown from the outside. "Where is Tessa Brown now?" she asked. "Still in Dallas as far as I know." "Get me her contact information." "Already on it," Derek said, and something in his face loosened slightly, the specific relief of a person who has been carrying a weight alone and has finally at last been able to set it down in front of someone with the strength to lift it. Captain Diane Mercer boarded 20 minutes later, and Nia liked her immediately. She was direct in this way that competent women are direct, not aggressive, not performative, just precise. She shook Nia's hand with a firm, unhurried grip, looked her in the eye and said, "I understand we had a situation this morning. I want you to know that what you experienced is not how I run a crew." "Good," Nia said. "How long before we can be airborne?" 40 minutes accounting for the full pre-flight sequence. My first officer is already running checks. Fine. Nia settled back into the master suite. I have calls to make. She did. She made 4 of them in the next 30 minutes, each one a piece of a structure she was building in real time, the kind of structure that isn't visible until it's nearly complete, and then suddenly you can see exactly what it is. She called Marcus first and walked him through everything Derek had told her about Holt and Tessa Brown. She could hear Marcus typing before she was halfway through the sentence, which meant he was already building a timeline. She called her chief financial officer next, because if Holt had equity interests embedded in active contracts, that was a liability that needed to be isolated before it became a public problem. The CFO, a careful woman named Janelle, who never used 2 words when one would do, listened without interrupting, and then said simply, "I'll have a full exposure analysis to you before you touch down." Nia trusted her to do exactly that. The third call was harder. She dialed the number for her mentor, a 70-year-old man named Walter Gaines, who had built and sold 3 companies in the course of a career that stretched back to before Nia was born, and who was in Nia's estimation the only person alive who could tell her something she didn't want to hear in a way she could actually receive. "Tell me everything," Walter said, which was always how he answered her calls when he could hear in the first syllable that something significant had happened. She told him. All of it. Thorne, the suite, the documents, Holt, Tessa Brown, the 3 clients, the embedded equity. She told it in the order it happened without editorializing because Walter didn't need editorial. When she finished, there was a silence on the line that lasted 4 seconds. Walter's silences were always exactly as long as they needed to be. "Greg Thorne," Walter said. "What was the name of the captain?" "Gregory Thorne, 19 years in private aviation. Do you know him?" Another silence. Shorter this time. "I know of him. He flew for Harlan Charter Services before they folded in 2017. Harlan's primary ownership group had 2 members. One of them was Raymond Holt. The aircraft's ventilation hummed. Somewhere in the forward cabin, a door closed softly. "Walter," Nia said. "I know." This wasn't a coincidence. Thorne being on this crew. "It does not have the shape of a coincidence," Walter said. "It has the shape of something arranged." He paused. "Who assigned Thorne to this route?" "I don't know yet." "Find out before you land." He said it the same way he said everything, without alarm, without drama, just the measured weight of someone who has navigated enough of the world to know that some things that look like bad luck are actually architecture. "And Nia." "Yeah. You did right this morning. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, not even yourself." She held the phone for a moment after he hung up, her thumb resting on the dark screen. The aircraft had begun its taxi. Through the oval window beside her, the tarmac moved in the way it moves when everything is normal on the outside, and nothing is quite normal underneath. Her 4th call was to a number she kept in her contacts under a single initial. It picked up on the first ring, which it always did. "I need a name," Nia said. "Someone inside Velocity above Holt's level who would have had the authority to assign crew to a privately chartered flight without routing through standard ops." The voice on the other end was unhurried. "That's a narrow list." "Good. Narrow is what I want. Give me 4 hours. I land in 7. Then I'll have it with time to spare." She ended the call, placed the phone face down on the armrest, and leaned back against the headrest. The aircraft leveled into its takeoff roll, and the ground fell away beneath her, with the specific sensation of departure that moment, when the wheels leave the earth and the world below becomes a different category of thing, smaller, arranged differently. The problems down there still real, still waiting, but momentarily suspended in the blue distance. Nia closed her eyes. Not to sleep. She didn't sleep on aircraft anymore, not the way she used to when she was young and exhausted, and the world was simple enough that a few unconscious hours could actually restore her. She closed her eyes to think, which was a different activity that required the same stillness. She was thinking about Tessa Brown, a finance analyst who had found something real and had been moved to Dallas 48 hours later, and who had, as far as Nia could tell, stayed there, stayed quiet, which meant either Tessa Brown had been frightened into silence, or she had been bought into it, or she had simply done what so many people do when they hold a truth that powerful people want contained. She had made a calculation about what speaking would cost her, and she had decided the price was too high. Nia understood that calculation. She had watched her mother make a version of it every day for 20 years in every room she walked into. The quiet, continuous calculation of how much of yourself you could show before the room decided you were too much, before the people with the authority to diminish you did exactly that. Her mother had been brilliant in a way that could fill a room and rearrange it, and she had spent her career being moved to the equivalent of Dallas over and over by men who were less talented and more comfortable and absolutely certain of their own right to occupy the best seat on the plane. Nia had watched that happen. She had been watching it her entire life. She had not become who she was by watching and accepting. She had become who she was by watching and deciding at the age of 19 in a borrowed blazer that she would find a way to own the plane. And now she owned the plane, and someone had put Greg Thorne on it. The intercom clicked softly, and Captain Mercer's voice came through the cabin, calm, professional, exactly the frequency that the situation called for. Ms. Sterling, we're at cruising altitude. Flight time to London Luton is approximately 7 hours and 10 minutes. The crew is available whenever you need us. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to make your flight comfortable. Nia opened her eyes. She reached for the briefing documents on her phone, the 30-page dossier, the flagged section from Marcus that she still hadn't read. She opened it now. The section was titled Executive Relationship, Mapping Velocity, Legacy Leadership. It was 12 pages long, dense with names and dates and organizational connections, the kind of document that looks like corporate bureaucracy until you know how to read it, and then it looks like something else entirely. She started at the top. By page 3, she had stopped breathing for exactly the length of time it took her to read a single name, a name that appeared in a footnote tucked inside a parenthetical about the original Velocity ownership structure in connection with a shell company that had been registered in the Cayman Islands 8 years ago. It was not Raymond Holt's name. It was not Greg Thorne's. It was a name she recognized from a very different context entirely, and the recognition of it in this document, in this footnote, rearranged every assumption she had made about the morning's events, about Thorne, about the suite, about whether any of what happened had been the spontaneous arrogance of one prejudiced captain, or whether she had boarded this aircraft today, walking directly into something that had been waiting for her. She read the name again. Then she set the phone down and stared at the seat back in front of her. Very still, while 30,000 feet of Atlantic air moved beneath the aircraft, and the world she had understood when she boarded this flight continued quietly and irrevocably to change. Nia said it out loud quietly to no one, because sometimes a name needs to be spoken before the full weight of it registers. Conrad Voss. She had met him exactly once 14 months ago at a private equity conference in Zurich, where she had been a keynote speaker, and he had been in the third row with his arms folded and the particular expression of a man who had decided before she opened her mouth that she would not say anything worth hearing. She had noticed him because people who close themselves off in the front rows of rooms are always more interesting than they intend to be. She had asked someone afterward who he was. Conrad Voss, 61 years old. Former hedge fund manager turned aviation infrastructure investor. He had a reputation in certain financial circles for taking positions in mid-market companies during transition periods, acquisitions, restructurings, leadership changes, and for doing it quietly through vehicles that didn't bear his name. The kind of investor whose fingerprints you found on things long after the thing had already happened. And his name was in a footnote in a document about Velocity's original ownership structure connected to a shell company registered in the Cayman Islands 8 years before Nia had ever heard of Velocity Private Aviation. She opened a new message to Marcus. Conrad Voss. Pull everything. Cayman entity connected to Velocity. Original ownership. It'll be in the file Priya sent you. I need to know if he still has a financial position in this company and through what vehicle. She sent it, then added, also pull his relationship history with Holt. Don't let this one sit. Marcus responded in under 90 seconds. Already on it. Also Thorne's crew assignment. Derek just sent me the routing records. The assignment was made 47 hours ago, manually overridden from the standard scheduling system. Override was logged under Raymond Holt's credentials. Nia read that twice. Holt had been terminated from Velocity 6 days ago, which meant someone had used Holt's credentials, either Holt himself accessing systems he should no longer have been able to access, or someone who had his login information to place Greg Thorne on her flight 47 hours ago. 47 hours ago was the same day that Nia's travel itinerary had been finalized and distributed to Velocity's operations team in preparation for the London trip. She sat with that for a moment. The aircraft hummed around her steady and indifferent, and she sat with the specific feeling of understanding that something she had walked into as a routine business trip had been constructed around her arrival. Someone had known she was coming. Someone had known which aircraft she would be on. And someone had put Greg Thorne in that cockpit. The question was whether Thorne had known why he was really there, or whether he was just a useful instrument, a man whose prejudices were reliable enough to be weaponized. She thought about the look on his face when she'd told him she owned the company. The contempt had been real. The dismissal had been real. But underneath it, there had been something else, something she had cataloged and set aside because she was dealing with more immediate things. There had been a calculation, a waiting, the look of a man who is performing a role and monitoring for something specific. She picked up her phone and called Derek. He answered on the first ring. I was about to call you. Holt's credentials, she said. I know, I just saw it. His system access should have been revoked at termination. It should have been, Derek said, and there was a weight in the should that told her it wasn't a paperwork error. Our IT director ran a check 20 minutes ago. Holt's credentials were never fully deactivated. His primary login was suspended, but there were 3 secondary access accounts associated with his profile service accounts, technically used for automated system functions. Those weren't touched. Who oversees IT deactivation protocol? Historically, that would have been reported to the COO. Who was Holt? Yes. The silence on the line had a texture to it, dense, the texture of things that are becoming clear. Derek, I need you to do something uncomfortable, Nia said. Tell me. I need you to assume for the next several hours that we do not know who inside Velocity we can trust. Not based on clean records, not based on tenure, not based on how cooperative they've been this morning. I need you to assume that what happened today had help from the inside beyond Holt, and I need you to operate accordingly. There was a pause. A real one. The pause of a man who is not a paranoid person being asked to think like one and taking that request seriously enough to sit with it before he responds. Understood, he said. What do you need me to do? I need the access logs for every system action taken under Holt's credentials in the last 30 days. I need that pulled by someone you personally trust and stored somewhere outside the standard Velocity server environment. And I need the list of everyone who had administrative IT access to those service accounts. I have one person I'd trust with this, Derek said. Maya Chen, our senior systems analyst, she reported to Holt on paper, but she flagged the fuel billing issues to me directly when the internal system kept routing her reports back to Holt's queue. Use her. She's in the London office. Good, then she'll be there when I arrive. Nia paused. Does she know what she's walking into? Not yet. Tell her enough that she's not walking in blind. I don't use people as tools without giving them enough information to protect themselves. She heard Derek take a breath. A small, involuntary sound of respect. I'll call her now. She ended the call and sat still for precisely the length of time it took her to decide what order she wanted to do the next 5 things in. Then she called Priya. The Voss connection, Nia said when Priya picked up. I was going to flag it when you landed. Flag it now. Priya was quiet for 2 seconds, the 2 seconds of someone reorganizing priorities without being dramatic about it. Conrad Voss held a 12% equity position in Velocity's original parent entity through a Cayman vehicle called Meridian Aviation Holdings. When the company restructured in 2019, that position was formally dissolved. On paper. On paper, Nia repeated. Nia. There's a consulting agreement, Priya said, signed 18 months ago between Velocity and an entity called Crestline Advisory Group. Crestline's sole principal is listed as a man named David Farrow, but Crestline's registered address is the same street address in the Cayman Islands as Meridian Aviation Holdings. Same address, different suite number, but same building. Priya paused, and Nia could hear the particular sound of someone who is about to say something they've been thinking through carefully. The Crestline consulting agreement is for strategic client development. The 3 corporate clients that represent 40% of Velocity's annual revenue, those relationships were all originated or renewed within 24 months of the Crestline agreement being signed. Nia closed her eyes. The picture assembled itself with the clean, terrible clarity of something that should have been visible from the beginning, but wasn't, because every individual piece of it had been placed carefully in a different room. Voss had never really left Velocity. He had restructured his position, moved it from equity to influence from the balance sheet to the client list, and he had done it in a way that made Velocity's revenue dependent on relationships he controlled, which meant that whoever owned Velocity also needed Voss. And anyone who owned Velocity and tried to clean house risked losing 40% of their annual revenue overnight if Voss decided to move his clients somewhere else. It was elegant. She had to give him that. Priya, she said, what's the value of the Crestline consulting agreement annually? $340,000. That's nothing. That's not what he's getting out of this. No, Priya agreed. It's not. That's the declared component. What he's getting out of this is leverage over whoever owns the company, the ability to be indispensable without appearing anywhere in the ownership structure. She paused again. I think he expected the acquisition to produce a buyer he could manage. Someone who would keep the existing revenue structure in place, keep Holt where he was, keep the consulting agreement running. Someone who would look at Velocity's numbers and decide not to look too carefully at what was underneath them. And then I came along, Nia said. And then you came along. Priya's voice was precisely neutral. You fired Holt in the first week. You've already flagged the ghost flights. And this morning you pulled Thorne off a crew before the aircraft left the ground. A beat. If Voss was watching, and I think we have to assume he was watching, he would know by now that you are not the buyer he expected. Nia thought about Thorne's last words on the aircraft. You have no idea what you've just walked into. She thought about the flat, waiting quality behind his contempt, the sense of a man performing a role and monitoring for something. Thorne hadn't been there because he was arrogant enough to treat the new owner badly on instinct. He had been there because someone needed to know up close and in real time whether Nia Sterling was going to be the kind of person who could be pushed, whether she would move to the jump seat, whether she would back down. She had been a test. The fury that moved through her was clean and cold, and she let it move through without stopping it, because she had learned a long time ago that suppressing that particular feeling was wasteful. You let it pass you, note the information it carries, and then you use it. I need everything you have on Voss on my phone before I land, she said. Not the summary, the full documentation. You'll have it in 2 hours. And Priya, the name David Farrow, Crestline's principal. Is he real? A pause that was half a beat longer than the others. We're checking. Check faster. She set the phone down and stared ahead. The aircraft hummed. Miles moved beneath her without acknowledgement. And then her phone vibrated with a message from a number she had last called from the contact, saved as a single initial. The message contained one line. It contained a name, not the name she had asked for the person inside Velocity with authority to assign crew outside standard ops, but a different name. A name the contact had included with a note that read, "This is who asked me for information about your travel plans 3 weeks ago. I declined. Thought you should know." The name was David Farrow. Nia set the phone face down on the armrest with the careful deliberateness of someone who needs a physical action to process an informational impact. David Farrow Crestline's supposedly nominal principal, the paper name on Voss's consulting vehicle, had been contacting people in Nia's network, asking about her schedule 3 weeks before she ever announced the London trip internally. This had not been reactive. It had been planned. Someone had been building this around her for weeks, maybe longer, and she had walked onto that aircraft this morning thinking she was going to London for a business meeting. She thought about her mother. She thought about the continuous calculation, the daily decade-long assessment of how much of yourself you can show before the room decides you're too much. She thought about what it cost a person to make that calculation every single day, and about all the people who had made it and come out smaller for it, not because they were small, but because the calculation itself was a form of diminishment. She picked the phone back up and made a call she had not planned to make until she was on the ground. Nia. The voice that answered was male, older, with the specific texture of someone who has managed global things for a long time and has arrived at a place where very little surprises him. "I wasn't expecting to hear from you until the meeting." "I know," Nia said. "I need to move the meeting time, and I need to add a participant." "Who?" "Conrad Voss." The silence that followed was the kind that comes from someone reassessing rapidly the nature of a conversation they thought they understood. "Voss isn't part of the London agenda." "He is now," Nia said. "I'll explain when I see you. Can you reach him?" "I can reach him." A pause. "Nia, does he know you know?" She thought about that for a moment, the precise question. It was the precise answer it deserved. "He knows I'm not going to sit in the jump seat," she said. "Whether he understands what that means yet is a different question." She ended the call and set the phone down again. The next 2 hours passed in the particular way that hours pass when you are in motion towards something and the thing is becoming more real with every mile, not faster exactly, but denser, more textured. She read Priya's documents. She read the access logs Maya Chen had pulled and transmitted from London. She made 2 more calls, both brief, both to people she trusted, with the categories of information that cannot be undelegated. She ate something because she had learned that people who forget to eat in high-pressure situations make worse decisions, and she had no margin for worse decisions today. At the 5-hour mark, she called Tessa Brown. She had tracked down the number through Derek, who had gotten it from Maya, who had it, because, as it turned out, Maya and Tessa had kept in contact after Tessa's reassignment, quietly through channels that didn't route through Velocity's internal communication systems, which told Nia 2 things: that Tessa Brown had known her reassignment was not a promotion, and that Maya Chen had known it too, and that both of them had been careful. The phone rang 4 times. Nia had already decided that if it went to voicemail, she would leave a specific message designed to make clear in the fewest possible words that this was not the call Tessa had been dreading, that it was in fact the opposite. Tessa picked up on the 4th ring. "Ms. Brown," Nia said. "My name is Nia Sterling. I'm the CEO of Velocity Private Aviation." The silence on the other end was the specific silence of someone who has been waiting for a particular kind of call for a long time and is now uncertain whether this is that call or the dangerous version of it. "I know who you are," Tessa said finally. Her voice was careful, measured. "Then you know I bought this company 11 days ago," Nia said. "And I need you to know before I say anything else that the report you filed internally 18 months ago about the contract billing structure is in front of me right now. I have read it. It was accurate. It was detailed. And it was buried." Another silence. Longer this time. And in the silence, Nia heard something that wasn't quite a sound, the specific quality of air that comes from a person who has been holding themselves together for a very long time, receiving confirmation that they were not in fact wrong. "I was told it was a misinterpretation of the contract structure," Tessa said. "You were lied to," Nia said simply. A long beat. "I knew that," Tessa said. I didn't have—" She stopped. Started again. "There was no one to tell." "There is now," Nia said. "I'm landing in London in 2 hours. I want you on a flight from Dallas tonight. I'll have my assistant send you the details. All your travel costs are covered, and you will be compensated for your time." She paused. "And Tessa, bring everything you have. Whatever you kept. I imagine you kept something." The silence that followed had a different quality than the ones before it. This one was the quiet of a decision being made, the specific stillness of someone who has been waiting for permission to stop being small and has just been given it. "I kept everything," Tessa said. Nia felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, more like the feeling of a lock opening. "Good, I'll see you in London. I'll see." She set the phone down and leaned back. Outside, the Atlantic was invisible beneath the cloud cover, and the aircraft moved through the gray above it with the steady, indifferent purpose of machines that don't know what they're carrying. She thought about Voss. She thought about the meeting she had just called the one he didn't know about, yet the one where she would sit across from him in a room in London, and he would look at her the way Thorne had looked at her this morning, and she would give him the same thing she had given Thorne. Not anger, not performance, just the absolute unmoving certainty of a woman who bought the plane, read the footnotes, made the calls, and is sitting exactly where she intends to sit. She reached for her briefing documents again. There was still a page she hadn't gotten to, page 11, buried in the executive relationship mapping section, a paragraph she had skimmed past when the Voss name had pulled her up short. She went back to it now. She read it once. Then she called Marcus. "The board," she said when he picked up. "Velocity's existing board members, the ones who carried over from the pre-acquisition structure. How many of them are still in their seats?" "4," Marcus said. "Why?" "Pull their financial disclosures. All of them. Tonight." "Naya." Marcus had known her for 6 years. He knew the specific register of her voice when something had moved from serious to critical. "What's on page 11? 2 of the 4 board members," she said, "are listed as personal references on the original Crestline Advisory Group registration documents." Marcus said nothing for 2 full seconds. "Pull the disclosures," Naya said. "Already pulling," he said. She ended the call. The aircraft hummed on through the gray Atlantic air, carrying her toward London, toward Voss, toward a room where the people who had built something rotten inside a company she now owned were about to discover that the woman they had tried to keep in the jump seat had not merely sat down in the master suite, she had read every word in every document in it, and she was bringing everything she found with her into that room. London. Luton Airport received the Global 7500 at 6:47 in the morning local time, under a sky the color of unpolished silver. Nia had not slept. She had read every page Marcus sent, annotated half of them, and by the time Captain Mercer's voice came through the intercom announcing their descent, Nia had a clearer picture of Velocity Private Aviation's internal architecture than anyone outside the company's original ownership group had ever been meant to have. The picture was not pretty. It was, however, complete. And complete was what she needed. Derek was waiting for her in the private terminal, which told her he had taken a commercial flight through the night, which told her something about the kind of person he was that she filed away and appreciated. Beside him stood a woman Nia recognized from the personnel photo in Maya Chen's file compact early 30s, with the specific quality of alertness that belongs to people who have been operating in a state of controlled vigilance for a long time. Maya had a laptop bag over one shoulder and a hard drive in her left hand, and she looked at Nia with the expression of someone who has been waiting a very long time for the right person to walk through a door. "You're Maya," Nia said. "Yes." No elaboration. Nia liked her immediately, and for the same reason she had liked Diane Mercer, the absence of performance. "Tell me what you found." Maya didn't wait for a conference room. She started talking in the terminal, walking beside Nia toward the car that was waiting outside, and she talked the way people talk when they have been holding information under pressure for so long that the release of it has its own momentum. The service accounts under Holt's profile were accessed 11 times in the 6 days following his termination. The last access was 47 hours ago, which matches the crew assignment override for your flight. But the earlier accesses, the first 10, weren't scheduling related. They were pulling data from the client contract management system. Which clients? All 3, the Crestline-originated accounts. Maya glanced at her. Whoever was using those credentials was downloading the full contract terms, renewal schedules, and client contact information. Nia processed that while the car door was opened for her, and she slid into the back seat. Derek and Maya got in after her. "They were preparing to move them," she said. It wasn't a question. "That's what it looks like," Maya said. If those 3 clients were contacted directly and offered comparable service through a competing operator, Velocity would lose the revenue before any contractual protections could be enforced. The contracts have a 60-day notice clause, but client relationships don't. Those belong to whoever cultivated them. And those relationships belong to Voss, Nia said. Maya looked at her, and in the look was the specific quality of someone who has been working alone in a dark room and has just had someone else walk in and turn on the light. You know about Voss? I know about Voss, Nia confirmed. What else did you find in those access logs? One more thing. Maya opened her laptop with the focused efficiency of someone who has practiced this moment. On the 4th access, the credentials were used to push an update to the crew scheduling system, not a manual override, an update to the underlying assignment algorithm, specifically to the priority weighting for a crew classification called Senior Legacy Designation. What is that? It's a classification that was created 8 years ago when Velocity's original ownership group was assembling their preferred crew roster. Pilots and attendants with the classification get priority assignment on premium charter routes ahead of standard rotation. Captain Thorne has held the Senior Legacy designation since the system was built. Maya looked up from the screen. The update pushed 4 days ago moved the SLD priority weighting from a tiebreaker factor to an absolute override, meaning the system would assign any SLD crew member to a premium route before anyone else on the roster, regardless of other scheduling logic. So Thorne's assignment to my flight wasn't just a manual override using Holt's credentials, Nia said. It was also guaranteed by a system change that would have looked like routine maintenance. Belt and suspenders, Maya said quietly. Nia sat back. The car moved through London's morning traffic, the city assembling itself outside the windows in the way that cities do at this hour, not yet fully awake, carrying the particular atmosphere of early morning that belongs equally to beginnings and endings. She thought about the engineering of what had been done, the manual override as backup to the algorithmic guarantee, the service accounts left live so the credentials would be available, the data pull on the client contracts, each layer of it placed with the careful patience of someone who had done this kind of thing before in other companies, in other acquisitions, and who had never been caught because the people they did it to had always eventually moved to the jump seat. What's the meeting situation? She said to Derek. Velocity's London executive team is assembled at the Mayfair office. 12 people, department heads and senior directors. They're expecting a standard new ownership introduction meeting. He paused, and Conrad Voss's office confirmed his attendance at 9:30, which is, he checked his watch, 2 hours and 14 minutes from now. He agreed to come. His assistant said he had no conflicting obligations and was happy to meet with the new leadership. Nia noticed the word happy. Voss was not a man who did anything because he was happy. He had agreed to come because he believed he understood the terrain, and he wanted to see her face when he demonstrated it. He was going to walk into that room and be charming and cooperative and quietly, unmistakably remind her that 40% of her revenue lived inside his relationships, and he was going to do it with the practiced ease of a man who has made this particular move many times and found that it always resolves itself in the same direction. He was going to be wrong this morning, and she was going to let the wrongness of it arrive at its own pace because that was the most efficient way to handle it. Marcus, she said, typing quickly, status on board financials. The reply came in 40 seconds. 2 of the 4 carryover board members, Harrison Price and Elena Vark, have undisclosed financial relationships with Crestline Advisory Group. Price received consulting fees totaling $180,000 in the past 18 months. Vark has a family trust with a passive position in a Crestline subentity. Neither disclosed, both currently seated on the Velocity Audit Committee. Nia read it once and passed the phone to Derek without comment. Derek read it. The color of his face changed in a way that was less about surprise and more about the specific, heavy feeling of having something confirmed that you hoped would not be confirmed. He handed the phone back. The Audit Committee, he said. So any internal review of the billing anomalies, the ghost flights, the Crestline contract, all of it would have been overseen by the 2 people Voss had financial relationships with. Nia finished. Yes. Derek pressed his lips together and looked out the window for a moment. Then he turned back. What do you need from me in that room this morning? I need you to be exactly who you are, she said. You're the head of operations. You've been doing your job. You flagged anomalies that were suppressed. That's your story, and it's a true one. I don't need you to perform anything. I just need you in the room. He nodded. And I need Maya in the room too, Nia said. Maya looked up from her laptop. Same instruction. You found what you found. You're going to say exactly what you found. Clearly, factually, in plain language. She held Maya's gaze. You've been doing this alone for a long time. You're not alone anymore. Maya swallowed once, looked back at her screen, said quietly but clearly, I understand. The Velocity London office occupied a floor of a building in Mayfair that had the kind of address that was itself a statement. When they arrived, Nia did not go to the conference room where the executive team was waiting. She went to a smaller meeting room first, a room that held 4 people maximum, and she sat down with Priya and Marcus on video call, and they spent 40 minutes going through the documentation in the order and sequence that would matter most in the next 2 hours. When that was done, she went to the bathroom, looked at herself in the mirror for exactly the length of time it took her to note that she was tired, note that she was ready, and decide that neither of those things was going to determine what happened today. And then she walked into the conference room. The 12 London executives were the kind of assembled professional group that knows it is being assessed and is simultaneously assessing back. There was the usual range, the ones who looked genuinely curious, the ones who had performed enthusiasm, the ones whose expressions were carefully neutral in the specific way that neutrality is carefully performed when you are uncertain of allegiances. Nia took all of it in without showing that she was taking it, in which was a skill she had refined over many years of walking into rooms where she was simultaneously the least expected and most significant person present. She introduced herself without preamble. She said her name, her title, and then she said, I've been on an aircraft for 7 hours, and I've read every significant document your company has produced in the last 30 months. I want to have a real conversation this morning, not a presentation, a conversation. She looked around the table. Who wants to start? There was a brief silence, the silence of people recalibrating because they had prepared for a presentation and were now being asked for something that couldn't be prepared for in the same way. And then a woman at the far end of the table, who Nia knew from the personnel file was the head of client relations, said, I'd like to talk about the Crestline relationships. The room tightened perceptibly. Nia looked at the woman, her name was Sandra Obi, and she had been with Velocity's London office for 6 years, and her personnel record had been flagged by Nia's acquisition team as one of the cleanest in the organization, and she said, Good, so would I. Sandra Obi looked at the faces around the table with the expression of someone who has decided to stop being afraid of a specific thing and is experiencing the specific physical relief of that decision. The 3 Crestline-originated accounts I've managed those client relationships for 4 years, directly. The clients themselves are real companies with real aviation needs. But the terms under which we service them have always been structured through Crestline as an intermediary, and I've never been given a satisfactory explanation for why the intermediary is necessary, because in my experience, the clients would prefer to manage their contracts directly with us. Have the clients ever asked about it? Nia said. 2 of the 3 have raised it informally. I was told to direct any such questions back to the Crestline contact. Who is the Crestline contact you've dealt with? A man named Farrow, David Farrow. I've never met him in person. All communication has been by email and occasionally phone. Nia held that for a moment. David Farrow, the same name her contact had seen asking for information about her travel schedule. The same name on the Crestline registration. Sandra, she said, what's your read on whether those clients would stay with Velocity if the Crestline arrangement was dissolved? Sandra didn't hesitate. They would stay. 2 of them have told me directly off the record that they would prefer a direct relationship. The 3rd is newer and I'm less certain about, but the aviation need is genuine, and we're the right operator for what they require. Something shifted in the room. Not dramatically, just a subtle atmospheric change, the specific quality of air that moves when several people in a room independently arrive at the same realization at the same moment. The Crestline arrangement was not protecting the client relationships, it was holding them hostage. Voss had constructed something brilliant and brittle, and the brittleness was Sandra Obi, who had managed those clients for 4 years and knew exactly where the actual loyalty lived. At 9:28, Nia's phone vibrated. The message was from the building's reception. "Conrad Voss is here." "Let's take a 10-minute break," Nia said to the room. She stepped out and met Derek in the corridor. "He's downstairs," Derek said. "I know. Bring him up. Put him in the small room, not here." She looked at Derek steadily. "I'm going to see him alone first." Derek started to say something, the reflexive protective, something that people say when they think someone they respect is about to walk into a room without adequate backup, and then he stopped. Because he had been watching Nia Sterling operate for the past several hours, and he had recalibrated what he understood adequate backup to mean in her context. "I'll bring him up," he said. Conrad Voss walked into the small meeting room 3 minutes later and was exactly what Nia had expected him to be. 61, silver-haired, with the kind of physical authority that comes from decades of occupying rooms on his own terms. His suit was understated in the way that very expensive things are understated. He smiled when he saw her, a warm, practiced smile, the smile of a man who is very good at making people feel that his attention is a gift, and he extended his hand. "Ms. Sterling," he said, "I've been looking forward to this." Nia shook his hand. "Sit down, Mr. Voss." They sat across from each other at the small table. He crossed one leg over the other, settled back, and gave her the full weight of his attention, and she recognized the technique because she had encountered it before in men who used presence as a form of pressure. The absolute enveloping quality of making someone feel that they are the only thing in the room in a way that also subtly means they are inside something you have created and control. She gave him a moment to finish performing it. Then she put a folder on the table. "I want to start with Meridian Aviation Holdings," she said. Something happened in his eyes. Not fear, not yet. The specific quality of controlled reassessment, the rapid internal movement of a man who is expecting one conversation and has just discovered he is in a different one. He kept the smile because that was the kind of man he was, but the quality behind it changed. "Meridian," he said. "That entity was dissolved years ago." "The entity was dissolved," Nia agreed. "The financial interest was restructured through Crestline Advisory Group, which shares a registered address with Meridian in the Cayman Islands, and which holds consulting agreements with Velocity that originated or renewed 3 corporate client relationships representing 40% of our annual revenue." She paused. "I have the registration documents, the consulting agreement, and the client contract history. I also have the access logs showing that in the 6 days following Raymond Holt's termination, someone used Holt's service account credentials to download all 3 client contract files in their entirety." Voss said nothing. "I also have," Nia continued, "the financial disclosure records for 2 of Velocity's current board members, Harrison Price and Elena Vark, which reveal undisclosed financial relationships with Crestline that should have been declared under their fiduciary obligations to the company. And I have," she said, and she paused here with the specific purpose of allowing him to feel the exact weight of what was coming, "a record of an individual named David Farrow making inquiries about my personal travel schedule to people in my professional network 3 weeks before my London trip was announced internally." The smile was gone now, not replaced by anything dramatic. Voss was too disciplined for drama, but simply absent. He looked at her across the table with the pure, undiluted attention of someone who is finally fully seeing the person in front of him. "David Farrow," she said. "I've been curious about him. Crestline's sole principal. I've had my team looking for him for 14 hours, and we can't find anything prior to the Crestline registration 8 years ago. No professional history, no prior address, no social footprint." She tilted her head slightly. "That's unusual for a person. It's less unusual for a name." Voss was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You're very thorough." "I've been told that," Nia said. "What do you want?" And there it was, the question underneath everything, the place that every room eventually arrived at when you had stripped away all the furniture. I want the Crestline agreement formally dissolved, she said. I want the client relationships transitioned to direct contracts with Velocity, managed by Sandra Obi, who has been managing them in practice for 4 years anyway. I want your agreement in writing that you will make no contact with those clients during the transition period, and I want your cooperation with the formal review of the ghost flights, the credential access, and the board disclosure failures, in exchange for which my legal team will consider the scope of what gets referred externally versus handled through civil process. She watched him process it. She watched him calculate the specific rapid calculation of a man who built things by understanding leverage, running the numbers on what she had, what he had, what each of them could afford. And if I don't agree, he said, then everything I just described goes to the SEC, the FAA, and the UK Civil Aviation Authority simultaneously, along with a press release that my communications team has had on standby since 6 this morning. She looked at him without expression. I land at 6:47. I've been busy. Voss looked at her, really looked at her, looked at the beige coat, the worn tote bag on the chair beside her, the complete absence of performance in her face, the quality of someone who has made a decision and arrived at it calmly and will not be moved from it, not by his smile, not by his presence, not by anything he has in his considerable arsenal. He looked at her the way Thorne had looked at her this morning, but without the contempt, because unlike Thorne, Conrad Voss was intelligent enough to understand at this point exactly what he was looking at. "You're 32 years old," he said. It wasn't quite a statement. It wasn't quite a question. "Yes," she said. He looked at the table, looked back at her. "My attorney will need to review the terms." "Of course." She slid a document across the table. "That's the framework. I'll need a response by end of business today. My legal team is available." She stood up. "I have 12 people waiting for me down the hall." She picked up her tote and walked to the door. "Ms. Sterling." She stopped without turning. "Thorne," Voss said, "what he did this morning, that was—" He paused. "That wasn't what I asked for." She turned then, slowly, and she looked at him with the full clarity of someone who understands exactly what has just been admitted in its absence of denial and its careful distance from what was actually asked. "What did you ask for?" she said. He didn't answer. "Didn't." "What you asked for," she said, "and what Thorne delivered, and what you apparently consider two different things. The distinction between them is not as large as you'd like it to be, Mr. Voss. Someone decided that a woman in a beige coat could be moved to the jump seat. Someone decided she would go." She held his gaze steadily. "They were wrong about the woman, and they were wrong about the coat. I'll let you sit with that." She walked out. Derek was in the corridor, and the look on his face when she came through the door was the specific look of a person who had been managing their anxiety by focusing entirely on something practical and is now releasing it. "How did it go?" "He'll agree," she said. "Get Marcus on a call in 20 minutes. She kept walking toward the conference room. "And get me coffee. I've been awake for 40 hours and I have 12 people to talk to." "Already ordered," Derek said, falling into step beside her. "Good." She paused with her hand on the conference room door. Through the door, she could hear the low murmur of 12 people waiting, not the silence of a room that had given up on waiting, but the specific live quality of a room that was paying attention. That was something. That was a starting point. She thought about Tessa Brown somewhere over the Atlantic right now, carrying everything she had kept. She thought about Maya Chen, who had been routing her reports around a corrupted system for 18 months and had kept routing them because she believed someone would eventually read them. She thought about Sandra Obi, who had raised a question in a room full of people who were waiting for someone to ask it. She thought about her mother. She thought about the calculation, the daily exhausting decades-long calculation. She thought about what it cost and who paid it, and who had been making them pay it for a very long time. She pushed the door open and walked into the room. The 12 people in that conference room had expected a new owner who would introduce herself, outline a vision, and leave them with a timeline and a follow-up calendar. What they got instead was 2 hours of the most direct conversation most of them had ever had inside a corporate setting. And by the end of it, 5 of them had said things they had been carrying for months and had not expected to say to anyone, let alone the woman who now signed their paychecks. Nia did not run the meeting from the head of the table. She sat in the middle of one side, which rearranged the geometry of the room in a way that was subtle and deliberate, and she asked questions, and then she listened to the answers with the full, undivided quality of attention that most people experience so rarely from people in positions of authority that when they do experience it, they tend to say more than they planned. Sandra Obi said more than she planned. She had started with the Crestline clients and kept going 18 months of observations, frustrations, small suppressions that had accumulated into a weight she hadn't fully noticed until she began setting it down piece by piece in front of someone who didn't flinch at any of it. A man named Peter Holloway, who ran Velocity's London maintenance operations and had the weathered, quiet demeanor of someone who spent more time with aircraft than with people, said that he had submitted 3 formal safety review requests over the past 2 years regarding certain maintenance scheduling practices on the ghost flight routes and had received no response from corporate operations to any of them. When Peter said that, the room went very still. 3 requests, Nia said. Yes. Written, logged in the internal system. I have the submission records. I want those records today, Nia said. She looked at Derek. Derek already had his phone out. The safety dimension changed the temperature of everything. Ghost flights were fraud. Unsanctioned flights with no oversight, no properly filed maintenance logs, no safety review. Those were something else. Those were the kind of thing that brought aviation regulators into a room. After the meeting, Nia stood in the corridor outside the conference room and made 3 calls in rapid succession. The first was to Marcus, who had been monitoring from New York, and who told her that Conrad Voss's attorney had already made contact and was requesting a call within the hour to discuss the terms framework she had provided. The second call was to the FAA's International Operations Office, which was a call she had hoped she would not need to make today, and made anyway because Peter Holloway's 3 unanswered safety requests had made it not a choice anymore. The third call was to Walter Gaines. Safety issues, Walter said when she told him about Peter's disclosures. 3 logged requests, no response, on routes that were already fraudulent. Then you had no option, Walter said. You know that. I know, she said. I just wanted to hear you say it. You did the right thing, he said. You've been doing the right thing since 6 this morning. Now stop second-guessing and finish it. She ended the call and turned to find Derek standing a few feet away with the expression of a man who has just processed the full scope of what the day has become. He had started this morning as the head of operations for what he believed was a company with some internal problems. He was ending it as a key witness in what was now shaping up to be a multi-agency regulatory investigation. Are you okay? Nia asked. He considered the question with genuine seriousness, which she appreciated. I think so, he said. I think I've been waiting for something like today for a long time without knowing what shape it was going to take. He paused. I should have pushed harder. On the billing flags. On Tessa's reassignment. Yes, Nia said. But you didn't bury them. And today you showed up. That matters going forward. He nodded. What do you need from me now? Go talk to Peter Holloway. I want every maintenance record for every ghost flight route pulled and preserved before end of day. Hard copies and digital. Nothing deleted, nothing moved. She looked at him. And I mean nothing. If anyone in this office asks why, you tell them it's a CEO directive and refer them to me directly. Understood. He started to go and then stopped. Tessa Brown's flight lands at Heathrow in 4 hours. I know. I'll have someone meet her. Nia went back to the small meeting room because it was the only space in the building that felt like it belonged to the conversation she needed to have next. She sat down, opened her laptop, and pulled up the personnel files for Harrison Price and Elena Vark Velocity's 2 compromised board members. She read them again, not because she needed the information she had it, but because she wanted to be precise about what she said to them, and precision required that she not rely on memory for something this consequential. Harrison Price had been on Velocity's board for 7 years. He was 64, former investment banker, sat on 3 other boards, and collected the fees with the cheerful efficiency of a man who had long ago stopped distinguishing between governance and ceremony. His undisclosed relationship with Crestline had paid him $180,000 in consulting fees over 18 months for work that, as far as Nia's team could determine, had never been documented or delivered. It was in the precise legal sense a bribe, not called that, not structured to look like that, but that in its function was exactly what it was. Elena Vark was different. Her undisclosed interest was smaller, a passive position in a Crestline sub-entity through a family trust. And Nia's instinct, looking at the record, was that Elena had known what she was holding and had chosen not to look at it too carefully, which was a different category of culpability than Price's. Not innocent, but different. She called Priya. "Price first," Priya confirmed when Nia laid out what she was considering. "The fee structure is cleaner as a disclosure violation and potentially as a breach of fiduciary duty. Vark's situation is murkier. I'd want to talk to her directly before we determine approach." "Can you be in London tomorrow?" "I'll be on the 9 p.m. tonight." "Thank you." Nia paused. "How's Marcus holding up?" "He hasn't left his desk in 11 hours and he's on his 4th coffee. So normal." Priya's voice held the dry warmth of someone who has worked alongside a person for long enough to find their extremes affectionate rather than alarming. "He says to tell you the Voss attorney call is scheduled for 3 o'clock your time." "I'll be ready." At 2:45, Nia's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it anyway because this was not a day for letting unknown numbers go to voicemail. The voice on the other end was male smooth, with the particular register of someone who has been professionally pleasant for so long it had become structural. "Ms. Sterling, my name is Thomas Alcott. I'm Gregory Thorne's attorney." Nia said nothing, which was its own answer. "I wanted to reach out directly," Alcott continued, "to communicate that Captain Thorne is prepared to cooperate fully with the company's internal review. He recognizes that this morning's events were a pause, the pause of a man choosing a word carefully, regrettable, and he hopes there's a path to resolving this matter without the need for formal legal proceedings." "Mr. Alcott," Nia said, "your client physically attempted to remove me from the master suite of an aircraft I own. He then made a statement to me that my legal team considers a veiled threat. And we have documentation of his participation in fraudulent flight operations spanning 18 months. Silence. "There is no path," she said, "that does not go through a formal process. Your client will have every opportunity to respond to the findings of that process. But cooperation is not a negotiating chip at this stage. It's a minimum requirement." She paused. "Is there anything else?" Alcott said there was not, and the call ended with the specific quality of an ending that both parties understood was a beginning. The Voss attorney call at 3 o'clock was more substantive. His name was Gerald Fenn, and he was precise and unsentimental, which Nia respected. He had clearly spent the hours since receiving her framework document, going through it with the thoroughness it deserved, and he came to the call having done his homework. "My client accepts the framework in principle," Fenn said. "He has questions about the transition timeline for the client relationships and the scope of the cooperation agreement." "The transition timeline is 90 days, Nia said. "That's enough for Sandra Obi and her team to move all 3 clients to direct contracts without disrupting service. I've already spoken with Sandra, and she's confident it's workable." "And the cooperation agreement, the scope of what gets referred externally versus handled through civil process. My client wants clarity on what determines that boundary." "The boundary is behavior," Nia said. "Full cooperation, complete documentation, no contact with the clients or with any current Velocity employee outside a formal legal process that keeps us in civil territory. Any deviation from that, including but not limited to any attempt to influence the client relationships before the transition is complete, moves us to referral." She paused. "Tell your client that I'm not interested in making an example of anyone. I'm interested in running a clean company. If he helps me do that, we resolve this through the process. If he doesn't, the process expands." There was a sound on the line that was not quite a word, the specific nonverbal of a lawyer who has just heard terms that are harsher than his client wanted and fairer than he expected. "I'll communicate that," Fenn said. "By 6 o'clock, Nia said. "I need his signed commitment before I leave for the hotel or the framework lapses, and we move to referral tomorrow morning." She could hear Fen deciding whether to push back on the timeline running the calculation in real time, arriving at the answer. "I'll have it to you by 5:30, he said. She was eating a sandwich at her laptop because she had learned from her 40-something CFO Janelle that the women who forgot to eat were always the ones who made avoidable errors at hour 16 when her phone lit up with a message from the number she had at the airport as the car approached the building. "Tessa Brown is here." Nia set the sandwich down and walked out to the lobby. Tessa Brown was 31 years old, and she carried herself with the specific physical quality of someone who has spent a long time taking up as little space as possible. She was taller than Nia, with natural hair pulled back and eyes that moved around the lobby with the quick assessing quality of someone accustomed to reading rooms for exits. She had a rolling carry-on and a laptop bag, and she was holding a manila accordion file with both hands against her chest in the specific way that people hold things they are afraid might be taken from them. When she saw Nia, she stopped, and for a moment she just looked at her, looked at the beige coat, the worn tote, the absence of anything that announced itself, and something in her face moved. Not relief, not yet. Something more complicated and more honest than relief. "You're smaller than I expected," Tessa said. Nia almost smiled. "I get that a lot." She extended her hand and Tessa shook it. "Thank you for coming." "I almost didn't," Tessa said. "I know. I've been almost doing a lot of things for 18 months. She said it without self-pity, just the flat, factual assessment of a woman taking stock. "I kept telling myself the timing wasn't right, or I didn't have enough, or the person I needed to tell it to didn't exist." "Did Maya help?" Nia asked. "The fact that she stayed in contact with you." Tessa looked down at the accordion file for a moment. "Maya told me 6 months ago that if the right person ever bought this company, they would need what I had. She told me to keep it somewhere safe." She looked back up. "I kept it on a drive in my mother's house in Memphis." They sat down in one of the smaller meeting rooms, just the two of them, and for the next hour Tessa Brown opened the accordion file and laid out 18 months of careful, meticulous documentation spreadsheets she had built in her own time on her personal laptop, cross-referencing Velocity's billing records with flight logs, client invoices, and the contract terms for the Crestline accounts. She had done it the way you do things, when you know they might be the only record that a wrong thing happened, and you are not certain anyone will ever ask to see them, with absolute precision. With the care of someone who believes in the truth of what they've found, even when no one around them is willing to confirm it. When Tessa was done, she sat back and looked at Nia with the expression of someone who has just handed over something heavy and is feeling the complicated mix of lightness and vulnerability that follows. "Is it enough?" Tessa asked. "It's more than enough," Nia said. "It's extraordinary work." Tessa looked at the table. "I have a job in Dallas that I hate," she said. "I've been doing it for 18 months, and every day I've thought about what I found, and whether I made the right call, staying quiet, and whether—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I have a daughter. She's 4, and I kept thinking about what I was teaching her by staying quiet, about what the calculation I was making every day was teaching her." She looked up. "That's why I got on the plane. Not because it felt safe, because I couldn't keep making that calculation." The room was very quiet for a moment. "I have a position for you," Nia said, "if you want it. Head of Financial Integrity for Velocity, reporting directly to me and to our CFO. Your job will be to build the system that makes what happened here impossible to hide. You'll have resources and authority and direct access." She paused. "It will not be easy. Some of the people in this company are going to resent it, and some of them are going to test it, and some days it's going to feel like you're building a wall with your bare hands. But you'll never have to route your reports around someone who's burying them, and you'll never be sent to Dallas again." Tessa Brown did not cry. She was not. Nia had already understood a person who cried in professional settings because she had learned, as so many women had learned, that tears in boardrooms are used against you. But something in her eyes changed, a quality of held tension releasing like a fist, unclenching slowly. "Yes," she said, quietly, simply. "Yes." At 5:27, Fenn's email arrived with the signed commitment framework attached. Nia forwarded it to Marcus, and Priya simultaneously typed one line "We're proceeding" and closed her laptop. The next 3 weeks moved the way consequential things move when they have been set precisely in motion with the specific momentum of a well-built structure doing what it was built to do. The FAA and the UK Civil Aviation Authority opened a joint inquiry into the ghost flight routes, prompted by Peter Holloway's maintenance documentation and the access logs Maya had preserved. Thorne's pilot's license was suspended pending the outcome of the inquiry, which his attorney had been told was coming, and which arrived anyway with the full impersonal weight of regulatory process. Candace received a formal notice of termination and a separate notice from the Aviation Authority that her crew certification was under review. Harrison Price resigned from Velocity's board on the 11th day in a letter his attorney drafted, which said nothing of substance and managed to convey through that very emptiness exactly how much there was to hide. The resignation was accepted. His undisclosed consulting fees were referred to the SEC as part of the broader documentation package Priya assembled, which ran to 412 pages, and which Marcus said when he submitted it was the most thorough document he had ever put his name on. Elena Vark called Nia directly on the 14th day. Nia took the call. "I want you to know," Elena said, and her voice had the quality of a person who has spent 2 weeks deciding how to say something, "that I knew the trust holding had a connection to Crestline. I told myself it was passive, that it wasn't material." "Was that true?" Nia said. A pause. "No," Elena said. "I knew what it was. I told myself a story about materiality because it was easier than acting." Another pause. "I'm not asking you to go easy on me. I'm asking you to let me cooperate fully, and I'm asking you to know that I'm doing it because it's the right thing, and not because I've run out of options." Nia was quiet for a moment. "I'll tell Priya to call you today," she said. "Full cooperation on the terms we've outlined. Thank you." "Don't thank me," Nia said, and she said it without harshness, just with the plain directness that had characterized everything she'd done since she stepped onto that aircraft. "Do the work. That's thanks enough." Conrad Voss honored the framework. Not graciously. There was nothing gracious in the way his compliance arrived one piece at a time, each piece with just enough friction to signal that he was cooperating because the math required it, and not because he had become a different man. The Crestline consulting agreement was dissolved. The client transition began under Sandra's management, and within 3 weeks, 2 of the 3 clients had confirmed their commitment to direct contracts with Velocity enthusiastically, in ways that made clear they had been waiting for exactly this kind of relationship. The 3rd followed on the 31st day. When that 3rd confirmation arrived, Sandra sent Nia a single message: "All 3 home, clean contracts, no intermediary." Nia read it in the back of a car on the way to a meeting in New York and felt something settle in her chest with the specific quiet satisfaction of a thing done correctly. Tessa Brown started her new role on the 1st day of the following month. On her first day, she met with Maya Chen by video call for 2 hours, and by the end of the call, they had outlined the first version of what would become Velocity's new financial transparency protocol, a layered system of independent review, external audit rotation, and direct-to-CEO escalation pathways that made it structurally impossible for internal reports to be buried the way Tessa's had been buried, and the way the fuel billing flags had been ignored. Nia reviewed the draft at 11 o'clock that night, sitting at her desk in New York with her shoes off and the office quiet around her. And she went through it line by line, the way she went through everything without sentimentality, with the clean focus of someone who cares about whether a thing works and not about whether it is impressive. It worked. She made 4 notes in the margins and sent it back to Tessa with a message that said, "This is excellent. My 4 notes are suggestions, not directives. Trust your judgment." Tessa's response came back in 7 minutes. She had addressed 3 of the 4 notes and pushed back on the 4th with a specific reasoned argument about why her original structure was more operationally sound. She was right. Nia told her so. Greg Thorne's formal hearing before the Aviation Authority took place 6 weeks after the Teterboro incident. Nia did not attend. She submitted her written account and the documentation her legal team had compiled, and she let the process run the way processes are designed to run when they have what they need. Thorne's pilot's license was revoked. The hearing record cited the ghost flight participation, the maintenance protocol violations documented by Peter Holloway, and the misuse of captain's authority in a non-flight situation, the incident in the master suite described in the official record with the flat procedural language of regulatory findings, which somehow made it more damning, not less. She read the finding on a Tuesday morning in the same beige coat, sitting in the same chair at her desk where she had sat the morning before she boarded that aircraft. She read it once, and then she put her phone down and sat with it for a moment, not with triumph, because triumph was not the feeling, and she had learned to be precise about feelings. The feeling was closer to completion. The closing of something that had been left open for a long time, not just on a personal morning at Teterboro, but in the long accumulation of mornings before it every morning, that a woman in a coat that didn't announce her had been asked to move because the person doing the asking had made a decision based on nothing but what they could see. She thought about her mother. She thought about Tessa sitting in Dallas for 18 months with an accordion file in her mother's house in Memphis. She thought about Sandra managing relationships for 4 years through a structure designed to make her invisible to the clients she'd built. She thought about Maya routing reports around a system that kept sending them back to the person they were reporting on. She thought about all the women in all the rooms who had made the calculation and found the price too high, not because they were wrong about the cost, but because no one had yet made it possible to afford the alternative. She thought about what it meant to own the plane. Not the literal aircraft, the Global 7500 that had flown her to London under Captain Mercer's steady hand while she read footnotes and made calls and assembled 30,000 feet above the Atlantic. The architecture of an accountability that none of the people who had built Velocity's corruption had believed was coming. Not just that. What it meant in the larger sense to own the thing that people use to put you in the jump seat. To understand it completely, to rebuild it from the inside, to make it into something that does not run on the assumption that the woman in the beige coat is a passenger to be managed, rather than a person who has read every line of every document in the aircraft she owns. Velocity Private Aviation announced its leadership restructuring 8 weeks after the acquisition. Naya sent a company-wide message herself rather than through a communications team because she believed that the first words a new leader says to a company should sound like that leader and not like a brand. The message was 4 paragraphs. It said who she was, what she had found, what she had done about it, and what she expected going forward. It was specific about the ghost flights and the board failures and the buried reports. It did not use the word regrettable. It did not use the phrase moving forward. It said, this happened here is what it cost, and here is what we are going to build instead. The response from the company's employees was not unanimous. Some people were frightened. Some people were angry in the specific way that people are angry when an accountability structure arrives in a place that has been allowed to operate without one. Some people sent messages to Nia directly through the address she had included at the bottom of the company-wide email that were the kind of messages you receive when you have said a true thing in a clear voice to people who have been waiting for someone to say it. Those messages she read herself, every one, because they were the reason she had written the email. On the day the new financial transparency protocol went live company-wide, Tessa sent Nia a message that read, First report submitted under the new system. No routing errors, no suppression. It went directly to your desk in 11 seconds. Nia read that message 3 times. Then she set her phone down and looked out the window of her New York office at the city that had made her and the sky above it, which was the particular blue of late autumn, clean and cold and unbounded. And she thought about a morning 6 weeks ago when a man in a uniform had pointed his finger at a woman in a beige coat and said, "Move," because he had looked at her and seen someone who could be moved. He had been wrong about her because he had never considered the alternative that the woman he was looking at had spent her entire life being underestimated by men exactly like him, and had built everything she owned on the other side of that underestimation, and was not about to stop now. Nia Sterling had not moved. She had stayed exactly where she sat in the seat she had chosen on the aircraft she owned, and she had waited with the patient absolute certainty of someone who knows that the room always eventually tells the truth about itself. And this time, the room had.